Hello and welcome. My name is Jennifer Gates, Field Services Director for the California Preservation Foundation. We want to thank you for joining this webinar entitled Public Participation and Outreach Strategies for Historic Preservation Programs, and encourage you to become a member of CPF and enjoy the benefits and educational discounts. Information on membership can be found on our website at www.californiapreservation.org. The California Preservation Foundation is a membership-based not-for-profit organization whose mission is to provide statewide leadership in education and advocacy to ensure protection of historic resources in California. The format for today's webinar will include a presentation followed by time for questions and answers. There is a toolbar on the right side of your screen. If you have a question at any time during the presentation, please type it into the box and we will hold the question until the end for the presenter to answer. You will be muted throughout the presentation. To hide and unhide this toolbar, click on the orange arrow. Please adjust your volume on your computer or phone. Today's presentation will be by Ken Bernstein, Christine Lazaretto, and Jay Platt. Ken Bernstein is the Principal Planner for the Policy Planning and Historic Resources Division of the Los Angeles Department of City Planning. In this capacity, he serves as manager of the city's Office of Historic Resources, where he directs Los Angeles historic preservation policies. He serves as lead staff planner for the city's Cultural Heritage Commission, oversees Survey LA, a multi-year citywide survey of historic resources with significant support from the J. Paul Getty Trust, and is working to create a comprehensive historic preservation program for Los Angeles. He also oversees citywide policy planning, including the department's work on its general plan elements, housing and transportation planning, updates of the city's community plans, and the department's urban design studio. He previously served for 8 years as Director of Preservation Issues for the Los Angeles Conservancy, the largest local not-for-profit historic preservation organization in the country, where he directed the Conservancy's public policy and advocacy activities. He has a master's degree in public affairs and urban and regional planning from Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Yale University. Christine Lazaretto is a principal with Historic Resources Group. She has more than 8 years of experience in historic preservation. Prior to joining HRG in 2008, Christine worked for Pasadena Heritage, a local nonprofit historic preservation organization where she served as Director of Education and the first Preservation Director. As part of her responsibilities at Pasadena Heritage, Christine organized outreach efforts to neighborhood groups and individuals about landmark designations, historic preservation incentives, and to raise awareness about preservation-related issues in the community. At HRG, among her other duties, Christine has worked on several large-scale historic resource surveys, including San Diego, Paso Robles, and Fresno. She has also been part of the survey team for several phases of the Survey LA field surveys and has been working with the City of Los Angeles on their outreach efforts for Survey LA for the past 3 years. Jay Platt is the Historic Preservation Planner for the City of Glendale, where he is responsible for the city's preservation program, including serving as staff liaison to the Historic Preservation Commission. He is a member of the city's Urban Design Studio, in which he conducts design review and helps develop and implement planning policy. Jay is also an instructor in USC School of Architecture, despite going to UCLA undergrad, teaching classes in its master's program in heritage conservation. Previously, he served as the preservation advocate for the Los Angeles Conservancy, working on preservation issues throughout Los Angeles County. Though a Los Angeles native, Jay lived in the Northeast for 12 years, getting his master's in historic preservation at the University of Pennsylvania, followed by a move to New York City. While there, he worked with the city's Landmarks Preservation Commission, private consultant Building Conservation Associates, and the Historic Districts Council, a nonprofit advocacy group. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you this afternoon to talk about public participation and outreach as it relates to historic preservation. And our objectives for today are to share with you first about a wide range of public participation and outreach tools that we think apply to communities of all sizes. Although I, as Jennifer mentioned, am with the City of Los Angeles, a very large city. Jay will be speaking about some of these tools as they apply to a mid-sized city, and we believe that the tools we're talking about today are really scalable to communities of any size. So whether you are with a public agency yourself, a commissioner, or represent a nonprofit or community group, we hope that these tools are useful as you think about public participation and historic preservation, and to see how these tools have been used to promote a wide variety of historic preservation programs. I thought I would start this afternoon by considering the question, why do outreach in the first place? What are the multiple goals that we're seeking to achieve when we engage in outreach activities? And first of all, I think it's important that those of you who are with local government, our programs are only as successful as the communities that we serve. We're only as successful as the preservation ethic that exists in those communities as a whole. And so it's important that outreach, in part, be based on creating a more generalized preservation ethic throughout the community and to serve these larger preservation goals. Along with that, I think it's important to say that I think we all would want, with the local communities we represent, to build a constituency for our preservation programs. We live in precarious times, particularly with local planning and historic preservation agencies, and all of our programs are subject to budget and staffing cutbacks. I think we'll be talking more about that as we go along. And it's important to build that political support, that grassroots support for the programs that we represent, particularly when, in terms of budget, we don't always compete so well with police and fire and basic services. So building that constituency is an important goal of outreach. We need to engage our communities as well to shape the programs that we develop in the first place, to make certain that what we are pursuing reflects community goals and needs. And also, when we're pursuing historic resources surveys, and I will be talking about Survey LA, our Los Angeles Historic Resources Survey, that the public is informing survey work to help us identify places that are significant in their communities. Next as well, historic preservation is rife with myths and misconceptions about what we do, and it's important in our outreach to get out there to dispel some of those myths that people have about historic preservation. As we go through these multiple goals, it's important to point out that we all should be employing different strategies, different techniques at different times to achieve these goals, and that's why I think you'll be seeing today from each of us a diversity of types of strategies that we've used in our communities. We hope that many of them are cost-effective or easy to use and are applicable in your own communities. So going on to start talking about some of the strategies and tools that we'll be discussing today, again, looking at the diversity of goals and messages, we're using a variety of tools to reach a wide audience, from traditional tools such as conventional public meetings and print publications to more current and cutting-edge tools such as social media, in addition to the newspaper, radio, and television media that we've all used in the past. Here in California, certainly in my community in Los Angeles, it's critical that public participation be sensitive to issues of ethnic and socioeconomic diversity, and be mindful of the fact that our message also often needs to get out in a multilingual way. The diversity of languages that are spoken in our communities needs to be accounted for, particularly in historic preservation when we're dealing with basic land use and property rights and diversity of cultures. We also need to consider staff and budgetary constraints, and I want to put in a quick plug for the CLG, the Certified Local Government Program, through the State Office of Historic Preservation. Our own community, we have been very successful in funding modest components of our public participation strategy through CLG grants. In fact, most of what I'll be sharing today about Survey LA we have accomplished through Certified Local Government grants, and it's a great tool to be able to supplement your public participation and outreach strategies. We also want to talk about the use of volunteers to supplement the work of paid city staff or historic preservation consultants, as well as partnerships with local organizations and associations. So to start on the city of Los Angeles, I love to use this map almost whenever I speak about the challenges in Los Angeles, showing the outline of the city of LA, with 8 of the largest cities in the nation fitting with room to spare inside its borders. We're a city of 466 square miles and over 880,000 separate legal parcels, and there are few cities that have greater ethnic and socioeconomic diversity than the huge city of Los Angeles. So outreach in Los Angeles is a challenge just based on our scale, and we've had to adapt different strategies to reach different audiences in different neighborhoods throughout the city as we pursued Survey LA and many of our other programs. And quite honestly, we've been experimental, and we've tried different things. Some of them have worked better than others, and we've tried to learn from our lessons, what's worked and what hasn't worked, and try to evolve our approach over time. So to share some of the tools that we've used in our office, I came into the Office of Historic Resources in 2006 and really created a preservation program that had been in the past somewhat bifurcated or fragmented among different agencies, and created a program that for the first time had under one roof most of the functions of historic preservation in the city. And so one of the things we did early on was to begin publishing an online newsletter, an e-newsletter, on a quarterly basis to share information about the program as it was evolving and reaching communities throughout the city. In addition, it is a vehicle to share information on Survey LA, our citywide survey. An e-newsletter is a great tool because it is low cost. It goes out without any mailing costs. I'm able to write much of the text myself with some assistance from staff members who contribute articles, and unpaid volunteer interns who assist with some of the layout and putting together of the newsletter. And we reach, doesn't sound like a huge number, but we do send it to over 1,500 recipients who really are the opinion leaders on historic preservation throughout our city. They are with historic preservation organizations, neighborhood preservation groups, business leaders, downtown developers, major commercial property owners, and the people who are out there doing historic preservation and talking about historic preservation throughout the city. So an e-newsletter, low cost, it's a great way to get your message out about what you're doing related to historic preservation. And again, address myths and begin to talk up much of what is going on in your city. So some of what we do in our e-newsletter, we share profiles on our newly designated local landmarks, which creates excitement about our local program. It encourages, we hope, others to seek local designation for their own properties. Many of the articles also provide technical assistance, everything from rehabilitation tips to how to do research on your own historic property or on your neighborhood. We share accomplishments and milestones about our program. We publicize upcoming events that we're having in the city around historic preservation. The newsletter also gives us a nice handout that we can print and bring to community meetings and other events. That is a great way of giving people a sense of context, a broader sense of what our program is all about. And after almost every issue goes out, members of the community email us or call us and tell us that they're so glad that we take the time to put this together, and they find it refreshing and almost surprising that a public agency is taking the time to communicate proactively in this way. So it's a lot of work to some degree to put this together, but we think it's worth it and builds us a great deal of goodwill for our preservation program. Well, another technique that has almost become traditional since the advent of the web is having an engaging website. Our website is at preservation.lacity.org. And one of the things I like to say about our website is really, it's important to take the time to have an attractive and engaging website, because really more people come in contact with our office and the work that we do on the web than through all the walk-ins, all the calls, all the emails that we get on a daily or monthly basis. And we track the traffic we get through the website. We have thousands of unique users who visit us each month, and most months it's from 80-plus countries, which is quite surprising. But as you can see, here's our homepage for the Office of Historic Resources. We share news and updates on the homepage and have pages within the site that relate to the diversity of work that we do on historic preservation. And here's just a few screenshots to give you a sense of the types of things we do on the web, and we would hope that most local governments are doing much the same. We have 29, I'll talk more about them in a moment, 29 historic preservation overlay zones or historic districts, and we have a dedicated page to each of the HPOZs that have profiles of each neighborhood, photos, representative photos of what those look like, and links to their HPOZ preservation plan and citywide ordinances, as well as a map of each neighborhood. We have frequently asked questions on the website about our historic designation process to try to address the types of questions that come into our office regularly. We have links to our applications for local designation and the Mills Act program, our property tax incentive program for owners of historic properties, to make those forms easy to access on the web. And again, we can track what inquiries are coming in on, and our Mills Act application is probably our most downloaded form from our website. We also have photos and profiles of our Local Preservation Commission, our Cultural Heritage Commission, and on the left, you have an opportunity to click buttons to subscribe to our e-newsletter, so people can subscribe online and then get on our list. We use a service called MailChimp to manage our list automatically of those who subscribe to our e-newsletter, so we can stay in contact with them and keep current on any changes in their email address. So that's the e-newsletter. Moving on to our Historic District program. Again, our historic districts are called HPOZs, Historic Preservation Overlay Zones, our kind of bureaucratic-sounding name for what most communities just call historic districts. We have 29 of them in the city, and they now encompass over 25,000 properties within those 29 neighborhoods. So that alone is a significant outreach challenge to stay in touch with the existing neighborhoods. And again, this being Los Angeles, there's tremendous diversity, ethnic and socioeconomic within each neighborhood, and diversity among the 29 neighborhoods. Some of them are very upscale, wealthy neighborhoods. The majority, though, are ethnically and economically diverse neighborhoods. The majority of those neighborhoods have a median income below our citywide median. So it's important to, again, employ a wide variety of outreach techniques, both when we're creating a historic district in the first place and working with communities to help them decide whether they want to go down this path, and then to address the needs that they have as they are a district. One of the things that we've done to address outreach within our HPOZs is the development of preservation plans. So here we're using a more traditional planning tool, the development of a plan with design guidelines for each neighborhood, and really using that as an outreach tool. We had somewhat of a crisis here in our HPOZ program with significant budget and staffing cuts to our department a couple of years ago. And we decided to address those issues by streamlining our program and try to reduce the burden of our caseload affecting those 25,000 properties in 29 neighborhoods by developing preservation plans that would provide greater clarity to what type of work would actually could be exempted from review, what type of work could be reviewed administratively by staff, and which of those projects would need to go before our local HPOZ boards. Each of those 29 districts actually has a local board, which is itself a 5-member board, which itself helps us with outreach in those communities. We did a major citywide outreach program around the development of these preservation plans, beginning with a template plan that we were then able to take and basically shop around to each neighborhood and intensively work with each HPOZ board at the local level and community members in each of those neighborhoods to tailor design guidelines that fit the architectural styles and needs of each individual neighborhood. That all of those plans, and we did 16 preservation plans at one time through that program, addressing all of those HPOZs that lacked preservation plans at that time. All of those were approved at the end of 2010 by our Planning Commission. And what we found is that since those have been adopted, those plans have assisted us tremendously with outreach because they provide visually engaging guides to what's acceptable and not acceptable work in each neighborhood, and they assist the boards and our staff in doing that more proactive outreach in each of the HPOZs. Other tools that we've used in our historic districts include kind of standalone publications, outreach publications, such as these that are shown here, one called Caring for Your Historic Home, which is really a guide for historic homeowners on appropriate rehabilitation work in historic neighborhoods. And we use these outside of our designated HPOZs. They're just a good general guide to what constitutes good work in compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards, our historic preservation standards, as well as a pamphlet called HPOZ Living, which is a basic guide to what it's like to be in a historic district and what the historic district regulations are all about. And we put those out in multiple languages, as you can see here, the Spanish and Korean language version of those, and we get requests for them in multiple languages quite frequently. And again, a tip here, although we had printing costs for these publications, we were able to obtain special funding, not our general fund dollars that compete with police and fire and other uses, but some fee revenue that is earmarked for information at our public counters. And we made the case that this type of publication would help applicants and really was part of our public information response at our building and planning counters at the city. And that's a technique I think you can use to find special funds for public outreach. Another technique that we have used is an annual conference that is our annual citywide gathering of historic district leaders throughout the city. We've done this in partnership with the LA Conservancy, our citywide and countywide nonprofit. I'll talk more about them in a moment. At the citywide conference, it gives us a great opportunity to bring the HPOZ community together citywide in a large city, share updates on the program, provide technical assistance, address key topics that all of those neighborhoods face, whether it's code enforcement, sensitive additions, issues of sustainability and green buildings. And the HPOZ conference has tremendous value. Again, it's a lot of work for our staff to put on and for the Conservancy to put on with us. But it provides an opportunity for networking among those historic district leaders across the city, which is something that's otherwise a challenge in a large city like Los Angeles. It gives each neighborhood a sense that they're part of something larger, really a citywide HPOZ movement or part of the historic preservation community. And for our staff, it provides an opportunity for relationship building with the HPOZs and kind of breaks down the walls between staff, people who might be perceived as bureaucrats by local leaders and citywide staff. We also do tours, which is a great opportunity for neighborhoods to showcase their community and the challenges of their community and show preservation in action. Partnerships are really key to any outreach, successful outreach strategy. We partner with the LA Conservancy as our large nonprofit, but also with many local historical societies in neighborhoods. And one of the things that's great about partnering as a public agency with a nonprofit is that nonprofit, while we bring kind of the institutional stamp of city government, the nonprofit brings kind of a nimble character, a strong volunteer base, in many cases volunteer docents or others who can contribute knowledge and energy in many ways that often we don't have access to as a local government, and really, of course, a broad-based constituency as well. It's important to realize in going into these partnerships that we have different perspectives, different interests, not that we have frequent disagreements with our partners, but it's important to recognize the difference between the advocacy bent of many nonprofit preservation organizations and the more neutral role of a public agency. But you should be thinking creatively about other partners for your outreach programs, whether it's neighborhood groups that aren't involved in preservation, such as homeowners groups or neighborhood councils like we have in Los Angeles, business organizations, and realtors who are often the first point of contact for historic preservation. Outreach to address myths and concerns as well. I mentioned the possibility of many myths arising about historic preservation. When a historic district is proposed, there's inevitably going to be a bit of a land use, property rights-based backlash whenever new regulations are proposed. So it's important as part of your outreach program to build in a recognition that staff is going to have to do some hand-holding and some outreach that's really targeted at addressing some of those myths or concerns from a property rights standpoint about historic district designation or even designation of individual properties. One resource I'd like to point out, it's on our website. I prepared many years ago when I was at the LA Conservancy a summary of top 10 myths of historic preservation and what are some potential answers to those myths or concerns. And there's a link here on our website. It's available on the LA Conservancy website as well when you're out there addressing those issues in a public meeting. And part of outreach as well is about the attitude of your local staff, and to realize that you're not just a bureaucrat, you're not just a regulator saying yes or no to preservation proposals in your community, that you are going in with an attitude that you are a partner with local communities, and that when you're evaluating projects, you're looking at it from a perspective of how can you achieve a win-win solution with project applicants, help them reach their goals while also serving broader public goals and the goals of city government. The city staff, your local government, should really be a trusted resource for community members. And so, again, I think the outreach that you do, all these other tools are only as successful as the type of attitude or tone that's conveyed by local government staff. Very briefly, just want to conclude with a quick introduction to Survey LA and then turn it over to Christine, who will talk more specifically about some of the outreach tools we've been using for Survey LA. But Survey LA is our citywide historic resources survey project, and it is in partnership with the J. Paul Getty Trust. It came out of a multi-year study by the Getty Conservation Institute that laid the groundwork for the project. And then the Getty Foundation, the grant-making arm of the Getty, contributed a $2.5 million multi-year matching grant to the City of Los Angeles under the provision that the city would create an Office of Historic Resources, a professional office to manage the project, and that was really the genesis of our office and these programs that we're talking about today. Survey LA is a two-phase project, and it took us a few years to put in place all of the tools necessary to conduct a complex citywide survey during our initiation phase of the project. And we're now in the multi-year implementation phase of Survey LA, where we're actually out there conducting all of the field surveys of those 880,000 parcels across the city. Outreach has been a critical component of Survey LA from the very beginning, and we've had multiple goals for our outreach program. In part, it's been to build support for the project so that it could progress through the city in a way that is accepted positively and is understood by communities that we're in. Again, to address misconceptions that might arise about what a survey is, and our mantra has been that this is not about historic designation, that survey is a planning tool. To do this in a multilingual way in a city like Los Angeles, to reflect various interests, to recruit volunteers and interns. That's been part of a good byproduct of our outreach program. We've actually had over 200 volunteers contribute to Survey LA in one way or another, and then to encourage public participation and public input. The outreach program that we've developed has really been based on an outreach plan that we've been rolling out community plan area by plan area. We have 35 plan areas throughout the city of Los Angeles, and we've been, again, using a wide range of tools. I mentioned CLG funding, and that has been key to our outreach program throughout. And the tools that we're going to share with you today were recognized last year by the National American Planning Association with their top award for public outreach nationally, and we're very proud of that. I will just quickly show you a few of the tools, and Christine will then share with you some of the more cutting-edge tools we've been using recently. We have a standalone website for Survey LA at surveyla.org that links back to our Office of Historic Resources site and shares news and updates about Survey LA and makes it easy for people to participate in the project. We developed early on a video, a half-hour video working with our city cable channel. That's another tip, another partnership that can work well, is to work with, if you have a local information technology department, to partner with them on communications, and we were able to, at a very low cost, to produce a video that we've been able to have on our website. We have a short 10-minute version that we're able to use for public meetings. We, through a CLG grant, we're able to translate that into Spanish and have a Spanish language version. And again, we're very proud that we were honored for the video with a local Emmy Award. We also, in a city like Los Angeles, cannot get everywhere we need to go with our tiny staff. And so we realized that early on and created a volunteer speakers bureau program to solicit and train volunteers to basically be our emissaries, our Survey LA ambassadors around the city. And the Survey LA Speakers Bureau program has worked really well. I think we had some concerns early on that, would people be able to deliver our very nuanced message around the city? And our volunteers have done a remarkable job going to 90-plus neighborhood councils all around Los Angeles and other community groups and events and sharing information about Survey LA with those communities and really easing the burden on staff. With that, I want to turn it over to Christine Lazaretto, who will share some more information about our MyHistoricLA outreach program for the survey.
Thank you, Ken. I just wanted to start out by saying that Historic Resources Group has worked on a wide range of public outreach activities for a variety of different projects. But for this presentation, I'm going to just focus on the MyHistoricLA program that we developed with the City of LA for Survey LA, as it is certainly the most comprehensive outreach effort that we have participated in so far. As Ken mentioned, MyHistoricLA is a multifaceted and multi-year approach comprised of a specific set of programs developed to meet the goals of SurveyLA. But these same ideas could be used for many other types of outreach programs and for cities of various sizes. This has been a large undertaking, but we relied on a great deal of assistance from volunteers and interns. And as Ken mentioned, we got a lot of funding from CLG grants. And several of the ideas that were implemented as part of this project came out of a volunteer steering committee that was established early in the process. We've learned a lot throughout this process about simplifying and streamlining our message. The goals of the MyHistoricLA program were not only to make the public aware of the survey effort and what it might mean to them, but also to engage the community in the survey process and encourage them to actually provide information and input into the survey. We know that there are neighborhood groups out there who have been informally surveying their neighborhoods for years. We also know there are lots of people who have expertise on particular subject matter, and there are also people who have lived a very long time in their community and know quite a lot about its history. So because of those reasons and the scale of our project, community input has been an important part of the methodology meant to supplement the work of the professional survey teams. The information collected by MyHistoricLA is actually included as a GIS layer in the database that's used by the survey teams in the field. So we actually are directly communicating everything that's collected during MyHistoricLA to the field surveyors. As part of the outreach process, we tried to stress that we're particularly looking for properties that have social or cultural significance, or that have a particular meaning to the community in which they're located, particularly those properties that might not appear significant based on their appearance from the street. And one small example that's on the slide you're looking at is the Black Cat. That's the picture on the top, which became a historic cultural monument in 2008 as the site of one of the earliest documented gay rights demonstrations in the country. So again, from the street, this doesn't necessarily look significant, but it's about the story behind it. So the key for this project was figuring out how to present our message, how to engage the community, and how to encourage their participation. So I'm going to talk about some of the tools that we developed for this project, which include a guide to public participation, the ways that we spread the word about the project, which, as Ken mentioned, included traditional outreach methods, along with a variety of social media tools, some of which are fairly new to the project. So one of the first things that we did was create this comprehensive guide to public participation that outlined general information about SurveyLA, explained the goals of the MyHistoricLA project and how it fit in with the overall SurveyLA methodology, and it provided a framework to understand the type of information that we're looking for. The guide identifies specific activities that will help gather information, but that we hope will also have future benefits for the community beyond use in SurveyLA. Once a preliminary version of this guide was developed, we held a small number of community meetings to test the ways that the ideas were being presented and to get some feedback on the program overall. Based on these meetings, the final version of the guide was created, and it's now available in English and Spanish. You can download a copy from the SurveyLA website, but you can also get it in hard copy from OHR as well. The activities in the guide are meant to be managed as a community effort. They can build on each other or be done separately, and they're designed to be flexible depending upon the amount of information that's already available about a community or neighborhood, the expertise of the participants, and of course the amount of time available to devote to the project. Once the information is compiled, it's submitted to OHR for use in SurveyLA. We did provide an Excel spreadsheet as part of the guide that people could use to collect their information, but we've also received information in a variety of formats, including some handwritten lists. The guide includes a range of activities which are grouped by category. The first is My Neighborhood, which are the more community-oriented or group activities. Examples in the My Neighborhood section include a neighborhood walkabout, which is basically a walking tour meant to help gather information. And there's also a photo collection activity, which helps people gather and catalog historic photographs. The next section is called My Story, and these slides are just showing you screenshots of the pages from the guide. My Story is an oral history component. And the last section of the guide is called My Place, and these are the more individual research tasks. And as I mentioned, these activities can be used to build on each other. For example, if someone does a neighborhood walkabout, they might identify a set of buildings that are of interest to the community, and then they can conduct follow-up research described in the My Place activities. But this is also flexible, and the activities can be done separately and in any order. We found the guide a useful organizational tool for us because it helped frame the whole project, and it gave us a jumping off point when we started meeting with community groups. But we also tried to be careful not to overwhelm people with the amount of information we were presenting, and we didn't want this whole thing to seem so daunting that nobody would participate. We tried to be careful to highlight its flexibility and that the activities in the guide were just meant to provide inspiration and guidance. And I think we found out throughout this process that sometimes that message was received more successfully than others. Once the guide was developed, we started creating a strategy for getting the information out to the community. Based geographically on the community plan areas and the sequence that had already been identified for the field surveys, we started reaching out to individuals and community groups who we thought might be interested in the project. And again, as Ken mentioned, this was, historic preservation organizations, but also lots of homeowners associations and historical societies and anyone who we thought might be interested in the project. We worked closely with the City Council field offices and the neighborhood councils. They helped us not only promote the project, but also put us in touch with a lot of individuals and groups who were also helpful. At first, we did all of this outreach using pretty traditional methods. We created flyers that we sent all over the city and posted in libraries. And we did individual emails and phone calls to everybody who had been put on this pretty lengthy list of potential participants. Later, and particularly this year, we started really using social media tools to assist with these efforts. We scheduled a series of community meetings and workshops for each community plan area. These meetings were phased over 3 years, again, following the sequencing of the field surveys. And we also experimented quite a lot with the format and content of these meetings as we moved through the project. We realized that the earliest meetings that we held were a little bit content heavy, and we were afraid that people weren't coming away with a good understanding of the project. So we experimented and we tried some formal presentations, some informal working meetings until we found what we felt was a good working balance. In 2012, the city received a CLG grant that allowed us to have a dedicated social media coordinator to assist us with Survey LA outreach. This allowed us to increase the online presence of the project and start using social media tools in addition to the more traditional methods that we had been doing. And I just wanted to mention that even if you don't have funding for a dedicated social media coordinator, and ours, by the way, is an intern position who works about 10 to 16 hours per week, we found it was really helpful once we had a single person who could be the consistent online presence for the project. So even if it's not a dedicated intern position, finding one person who could be that voice is really helpful. Survey LA already had a blog, a Facebook page, and a Twitter account, which had been initiated in earlier years by some volunteers. But until this year, they were pretty underutilized and only sporadically maintained and updated. With the help of the social media coordinator, we started using those tools more consistently and efficiently. One of the first things he did was start posting very regularly on the Survey LA blog, which was used to update the community on the status of the survey and provide notifications about upcoming community events. But he also did a pretty wide variety of other topics. He would highlight interesting properties that we found in the field. He did an article about architectural styles in Los Angeles, some current preservation issues, but also some more fun topics like some of the good places we found to eat lunch when we were out in the field. The Facebook page, which is on the slide now, was primarily used to promote the community workshops and collect RSVPs for meetings, and also to link to new blog posts and continue to keep people activated in the process. And we also started using the Twitter feed, which I think he updated about twice a week. This provided greater opportunity for us to interact with other like-minded organizations and to cross-promote relevant events and ideas. You can see on the slide that there's a tweet from the State Office of Historic Preservation. We also had quite a lot of interaction with the Conservancy on Twitter and other like-minded organizations, which helped us promote the project quite a lot. Our newest social media tool that was added this year is the MyHistoricLAorg website. MyHistoricLA is an online platform created by a company called MindMixer, which was developed specifically to encourage civic engagement. MindMixer has created sites for a number of municipal governments across the country, and Los Angeles also used a MindMixer site called LA2B when they were gathering input on the mobility element for the general plan. The MyHistoricLA site builds on the work we started in previous phases of the project, but allowed us to reach a broader audience, ask for more specific types of information, and have a continued dialogue with the community about historic resources. The site works like a community forum. It uses a series of questions as a framework and allows registered users to post their ideas under each topic, second someone else's idea, or provide additional information in the comments section. You can see in this screenshot a list of some of the questions that are currently on the site. We tried to provide a range, so some of them are quite specific. For example, what places are important to Los Angeles LGBT history, to a very broad, what is your favorite historical place in Los Angeles? We started with a small number of questions and periodically add a new topic to the site to make sure that there is consistently new content. To respond to one of the questions on the site, a user can identify its specific location on the map, which will then automatically generate an address, which has been very helpful to us as we link it back to the city's GIS database. Once the location is identified on the map, the user can provide additional information. So you can see here a place idea submitted by a user under the What is your favorite historical place section. And it allows the user to post narrative, some images, and links to additional information. Participants can also comment on someone else's idea, and as the organizers of the site, we try to maintain a presence on here as well. So you can see on this slide in pink one of the responses from our social media coordinator. The site also allows you to create incentives for active participation. So every time someone posts an idea or seconds someone else's idea, they can earn points, which can then be redeemed in the rewards store. Some of the rewards we've used are tickets to Los Angeles Conservancy walking tours and other events, and the one here which includes a tour with the Cultural Heritage Commission. Although so far we haven't had anyone actually claim any of the rewards. And we recently added this section that allows the field surveyors to pose questions to the public about properties that they have found in the field. So these are things that either aren't quite visible from the public right-of-way or have been really troubling or difficult to research. So how successful have these efforts actually been? We actually feel that we've had a really good response so far. We have had community groups do neighborhood walkabouts. We've gotten lots of lists of properties from individuals and groups. We know of at least a couple of oral history projects that have been undertaken, and lots of community groups have helped us do additional outreach and spread the word at local events. Our Speakers Bureau volunteers have been to over 100 community meetings. Our community workshops have been held in all 35 community plan areas. We have 42 blog posts since the Survey LA blog was created in 2010, although almost half of these were created since February of this year by our social media coordinator. 144 people have liked Survey LA on Facebook, and we have 533 followers on Twitter. There are also 500 active users on the MyHistoricLAorg site, and they've generated about 200 place ideas so far. But of course, we also know these numbers don't tell the whole story, since there are many people who view one or more of the social media components without actually becoming registered users. Our outreach efforts have also resulted in a good amount of media coverage. This slide shows a Curbed LA article describing the Mind Mixer site, and a more recent article in the Daily News that highlighted some of the ideas submitted by the public in the San Fernando Valley survey. As a result of the Speakers Bureau presentation, a representative of KCSN, which is the public radio station associated with Cal State Northridge, offered to provide a series of public service announcements for the project. And KPCC did a story about the food-related ideas that were submitted in response to a question on the Mind Mixer site. We've also received a lot of useful information from the community that has helped inform the field surveyors. Some neighborhoods have been collecting information for years, and because of our outreach efforts, have shared their results with Survey LA. This slide shows a representative survey form that was submitted by the Los Feliz Improvement Association. They've been at this for a long time and have done quite a lot of research, and I think they have a form for every single property in Los Feliz. The one that I'm showing here is a 1914 house that was built for LA Times publisher Harry Chandler. This is something that you actually can't see very well from the public right-of-way, and so we might have actually missed it were it not for this community input. Information about this property was handed to us by an individual at one of our community meetings. From the street, it isn't actually very interesting. It's not great architecture. It's been altered a little bit. But it turns out that it was actually originally a Pacific Electric substation constructed in 1911, so it has quite a bit of important history. This is also in the valley on Vineland and Riverside. This post on MyHistoricLAorg helped field surveyors identify several properties associated with the Weeks poultry farming colony in Winnetka, which is in the West San Fernando Valley. And these are a couple of properties associated with the original poultry farm that was identified in the field. This is the Dalmatian Club in San Pedro, which has important cultural significance. And this is a rare example of some programmatic architecture. It was originally designed to resemble a bowl of chili and housed a restaurant named the Chili Bowl. There were originally 33 of these constructed, and we think that this might be the last one. Information about this was submitted to the website, along with photos of numerous other examples of roadside architecture. And the last two examples I'm going to show illustrate how sometimes these things can take on a life of their own, particularly when you're dealing with online commenters. So on the MyHistoricLA.org site, someone posted about a 1960s development in Encino under the topic, "What places represent post-World War II suburbia in Los Angeles?" We happened to be in that area doing field work when this was posted, so you can see here my comment thanking the person for their submission. But you can also see comments from other users expressing their own opinions about the neighborhood, including one that said it should be under the embarrassing architecture examples in Los Angeles heading. In this example, posters used the MyHistoricLA.org site to generate interest and support for an advocacy issue. Namely, they were trying to save buildings on the lot, which is the Pickford Fairbanks Motion Picture Studio, which is actually partially in LA and partially in West Hollywood. A master plan for the site identified several potential historic buildings for demolition. And this original post resulted in 2 pages worth of comments about how to save the site, how to get involved in the fight, whether they should picket the project, and providing phone numbers for council members. After quite a bit of internal discussion, we decided not to intervene on either of these or remove any of the comments, but I bring it up here just as the types of issues you should consider when you're opening your project up to online commentary. So to wrap things up, I just want to say again that we do feel good about the tools that were developed for Survey LA, and we think that many of these ideas will translate to other projects. Some of the challenges that we faced were learning how to communicate our message clearly and effectively. This definitely took us some trial and error, and of course we continue to refine things as we move forward with the project. Reaching the right people is also a challenge. You can see in this photograph that this is one of our less successful community meetings. The earlier slides showed nice rooms full of people, but here I think we had more presenters than actual members of the public. And of course, no matter how much outreach we did, we still had people who felt like they had been missed or who said they hadn't learned about the project until late in the process. So it's just something to keep in mind that you can never really do enough of this kind of outreach. We also had to provide some motivation for participation in the process. While we're very happy with the information we've received so far, we recognize that we're asking people to take time out of their schedules to volunteer information for a city project. So early in the process, we were careful to convince people that their input would actually be considered in a meaningful way. And some of the lessons that we learned throughout this 3-year process is to use a variety of outreach tools, but in a coordinated way to reach a wider audience. But being cognizant that we're not implementing so many programs that we couldn't manage them. But we definitely wanted to have a variety so that we could reach a variety of different people. Along those same lines, don't be afraid to try different approaches until you find what is comfortable for you and what works best for your community. Consistent but not too frequent online updates are very important. Striking that balance between posting too often that people become annoyed or not often enough that people stop thinking there's a new reason to visit the website. The content also needs to be creative. Again, don't be afraid to experiment until you find out what resonates with your community. And of course, the most important thing that we learned was to try to maintain consistent contact with people who were interested in the project. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay Platt.
And I'm going to pick up the story by looking at how we deal with things in Glendale, California, obviously. which is a mid-sized city, but really in many ways I think it's similar to a smaller town because everyone kind of knows everyone, and we really have a connection, I think, between our political entity, our local community members, the media. We ultimately have a lot of responsibility to these people in terms of preservation, and there's a lot of interest in our community in historic preservation. And what I wanted to focus on were two aspects of how we are trying to do outreach in our community. First, talking about responding to the community. And what Ken and Christine have been talking about is a lot of proactive outreach, and that's incredibly important. And of course, we try to do it whenever we can. But the reality of our story is that sometimes we are doing reactive outreach. So I'll talk about both of those aspects, and then also talk about just some of the ways that we try to get the word out on a very low budget in our smaller community. And I can no longer forward the slides. Yes. Ken Bernstein did something here, everyone. There, great, thank you. Ken Bernstein solves all technical issues, even those he creates himself. So here I just wanted to give a quick overview for people who aren't familiar with Glendale. You see Glendale in the red, you see Los Angeles in the purple color, and maybe we could fit a Pittsburgh in Glendale. I'm not sure, but we're definitely a small town, and it looks like a hostile relationship when you look at it in this this diagram. But we actually have a very cordial relationship with Los Angeles and our surrounding communities. Looking at Glendale individually, we're a city of 200,000 people. We have 40,000 properties in our community, and we have 30 square miles of land area. So in many ways, this doesn't represent a typical small town, but we feel that way just because of the reality of who we're working with and how close we deal with people in Glendale. To give you a sense of where we are in terms of the age of our buildings and the amount of historic resources we have, we've put together this map where everything that you see in green and yellow represents buildings that are 30 years or older in the yellow and 50 years or older in green. And unlike some of our neighbors in Southern California, we kind of missed out on the boom in the 1880s. But by the 19-teens and especially the 20s, we were known as the fastest growing city in America. So our residential housing stock in particular represents a great collection of craftsman and period revival structures. Our commercial districts represent, nothing that old, Art Deco, Art Moderne types of structures. But based on the fact that we have so many of these older properties in the community and so many community members who choose to live in Glendale because of our, excellent quality of housing stock, we have a lot of passion for preservation. So we have a head start working with a community that's been very active for a number of years. We have a lot of individual landmarks. We're pushing 100 individual landmarks. We're looking forward to passing that number hopefully next year. And many of them are beloved members of the community, like the Alex Theater, which is just universally known and loved by our residents. But the real passion is coming out in terms of our neighborhoods. Our residential neighborhoods represent some of the best collections of housing stock from the period revival decades of the 20s and 30s. And the residents are very keen to protect these resources. We've had a number of the starter castles or mega mansions come in, and those are often the catalysts for us to start considering what to do. And this is the first case study I wanted to share with you when we're thinking about our historic districts. We came very late to historic districts when we compare ourselves not just to Los Angeles, but to neighbors in Pasadena, Santa Monica, and then certainly around the country. But around the turn of the millennium, many residents in Glendale were concerned about changes that they were seeing in the community in terms of some of these inappropriate new developments. First, I wanted to just kind of share that in the intervening years, we've become a full-service community. So we are a regional center now, generating our own power and water, and having a lot of interest in scrutinizing what we do at the city government level. We have two very active historical societies, and these are the people who really are focusing us on our historic preservation efforts, keeping us honest and on the right path whenever we can be there, which of course is always. We also have very, very active homeowners associations in Glendale, representing large amounts of the city. And then, probably most interestingly compared to how things work in Los Angeles, we have a small town press. We have the Glendale News Press, which often features historic preservation issues on the front page. So I'll address media relations and how we deal with our small town press in a few minutes. But first I wanted to talk about this kind of reactive response, where we have things happen that we can't expect. We are excited to do educational outreach whenever we can, but in many situations we can't predict exactly what's going to happen. So in the case of our historic districts, with Cumberland Heights, which is one of our key residential neighborhoods, excuse me, we're trying to get some water in the room first. We had a situation where residents were coming to the city and saying, we need to have historic districts. The previous city ordinance required 100% buy-in from every property owner in a potential historic district. And you can imagine how difficult, if not impossible, it is to get 100% buy-in. So based on that input from the community, the city reacted. We created a revision to our historic preservation ordinance that allowed for less stringent buy-in so that it would follow kind of our zoning principles for making zone changes, which ultimately historic districts become zone overlays. In this case, we made the change, and then we went out to the community and we said, we are going to work with you to create a historic district. We've changed our ordinance, and now we are going to try to make everything available to you so that you can come to us and say, we want to protect our neighborhood. Unfortunately, when we went out into the community on this first round, which started around 2002, 2003, we basically were telling the community what we were going to do. We weren't going to the community and saying, what do you need? What are your concerns? How can we help you? Because of that problem, we ran into some issues in this attempt to create a 500 property historic district. Based on not having told people what to expect when the historic district was designated, we started hearing after some of our informational community meetings that people were confused. They didn't understand what will happen after the historic district is designated. What is going to happen to me as a property owner when I come to you and say, I want to put a new roof on the house or I want to change my windows? There was so much confusion about this that the proponents of the historic district actually came to the city and withdrew their application, basically with the agreement that the city was going to work toward rectifying the situation by creating a new ordinance and then also by creating historic district design guidelines so that there would be predictability in the process. The result of this ordinance change, which was directly driven by this community response, was that we created a task force, the Historic District Task Force, that was a joint effort between our Historic Preservation Commission, the Glendale Historical Society, residents of various neighborhoods that were interested in protection through districting, and we came up with a new process, basically. And this flowchart kind of shows you how this manifests itself in our new ordinance, where every item that you see in blue is a point where there's public input. There's either a public hearing before the Preservation Commission, the Planning Commission, City Council, or there are individual community meetings with the people in the neighborhoods that are interested in creating a historic district. And this is a very cumbersome process in many ways. At staff level, we sometimes think, is there any way we could streamline this a little? But what we've realized is that it takes 1.5 years, sometimes even close to 2 years, for a historic district to be designated. But by the time it gets to City Council, which is the final step, we know that it's been vetted and we know that people have heard what they need to hear to make an informed decision in terms of whether they support the district or not. We created these guidelines, which won an award from the Los Angeles Conservancy, because we needed to provide that level of certainty for owners who can refer to the guidelines whenever they're contemplating a change and get a sense of what we can approve at staff level, what kinds of work probably won't get approved, and what kinds of things need to go to the Historic Preservation Commission for review. And because of these changes, we've had a tremendous amount of success. We now have 4 historic districts designated. We expect to have a 5th district with another 200 residences designated next week. And then we have another one in the pipeline. And neighborhoods all around the city are talking to us about, well, how can we become a historic district? So it's become a very effective grassroots planning tool. And this, I think, is largely due to the fact that we have really taken the community's input. We've made our outreach valuable to them. They understand that we're listening to them now, rather than the first round where we had to abandon the historic district. And so far, so good, I would say, in terms of the level of success we've had in monitoring and managing our historic districts, and also in terms of convincing people in the community that this is a process that's working and that it's available to them, and there's less for them to be afraid of, obviously. On a smaller scale, I just wanted to share another case study where, again, the city had to kind of change gears right away. We had to react to public comment, and then we had to reinvigorate kind of our outreach program to respond to what we were hearing from the community. This is a craftsman bungalow, like many of our other craftsman bungalows in Glendale, but this took on special importance. It's individually an interesting building. It was identified as eligible for our local register, but at a point about 6 years ago, the city was looking for ways to increase our parkland. Since the 20s, we have recognized that we don't have enough parks in Glendale. We're almost completely built out, and in our more dense, kind of more urbanized neighborhoods, we really don't have anywhere to go except for creating pocket parks, or mini parks we call them, and in many cases that involves tearing down some buildings. So our Parks Department identified this intersection as a very good candidate for a mini park based on the needs of the community and looking at radius maps and all of that. 3 craftsman houses stood on the property, including the one in red, which is the one I showed you the photo of. The city's plan was to scrape the site clean, leaving a lot of the trees that you see, but really creating a park on a flat parcel with no structures. The Historical Society predictably became concerned that we were losing what is still a fairly limited resource in terms of the number of craftsman residents we have, and certainly one of our beloved housing types. But interestingly, the neighborhood also became very concerned about the loss of these properties. They who would most benefit from a park were also concerned that we were going to lose a piece of the neighborhood history, and in the case of the house in red, a particularly nice example of this type. So this is where the city once again was surprised. We thought, we're doing the right thing. We're creating a park. This is a neighborhood that really wants parks and needs parks. But once we heard from our group of historical advocates as well as the neighborhood, we shifted gears, we hired new consultants, and we created a very deep public outreach process, which involved community meetings. What do you want in a park? How are you going to use the park? And we had a model built by the design team so that people could really visualize the park, and we brought it out on site, and we had people come and look at it, taking comments along the way. And the result was a park that really tries to meet all of the neighborhood's interests and concerns in terms of having active recreational space, passive recreational space, space for kids, space for senior citizens, as well as maintaining the historic bungalow that was on the property. And some people who look at parks might say, well, this is a rather cluttered design. We're trying to accomplish too much. It's not going to work. The results have been phenomenal. We've had an incredibly high usage rate of the park. It's been very well reviewed by the people who are looking at park design, and it's also won several awards. Whenever we do this kind of outreach, we want to memorialize it through keeping track of who's been there and who's involved. And this is something that's really important for everyone to remember, to document every step of your outreach programs whenever you can. And so often we go out into the field and we're like, oh no, we forgot our camera. But luckily phones have great cameras on them now, so you can even use those. One interesting thing about the outreach program was that there was an unanticipated event in terms of the play area for children. The original play structure that was put in was one of these big kind of green and blue and yellow plasticky looking things with lots of bridges and climbing toys and all sorts of things. When the community came in and saw its placement in proximity to the house, they said, well, wait a second, from a large section of the park, we can't even see what is supposed to be the centerpiece of the park. So again, reacting to this problem, the community did more outreach, looking into different types of play structures, meeting again with community members to find out what works for them, what will meet their needs, both of the children as well as of the experience of the park. And we ended up putting this kind of spider web play structure in, which is almost completely transparent, doesn't block your view, and most importantly, the kids love it. Of course, I didn't get that picture, but we have several pictures of kids just climbing all over this thing. So today we have a very successful park. We have successful preservation in the park. In terms of finding a use for the house, there was talk, could the Historical Society move in? Could we turn it into a museum? A lot of those uses that people, ask for in many communities that aren't always the most realistic options. What we were able to do was turn this into a facility for our at-risk youth in Glendale. And we felt it was very important that the domestic kind of character of the interior of the house be preserved, and that kind of creates an atmosphere of a more homey quality that really works as the counselors are working with the kids. Plus, what it does is keep people in the park during business hours. So during the day, we have eyes on the park, and we haven't had any serious vandalism or any other issues so far. And what originally was going to be called the Cedar Maple Mini Park, which is a pretty wonky, bureaucratic term, we realized, well, that's not really the right term for this park. We saved a craftsman bungalow. We responded to the community. We thought about our history. So the city decided to rename the park the Glendale Heritage Garden. It's been very successful. The last bit of kind of reactive outreach I wanted to share with you involves our community planning process. We are doing a general plan update, as all cities are required to do, and we've decided to break it down into community plans, and we'll have 5 community plans that in total will represent the update of our general plan. Because of our topography in Glendale, and I hope this arrow is visible on your screen, I think it should be, we have a mountain range that runs through our city. This is Glendale proper, to the south of the mountain range, but we have an area called North Glendale that runs above the range. And for decades, since it was annexed in the 50s and into the early 60s, the people of North Glendale have felt very distant from the city. They felt the city is not interested in them. They felt the city is not responsive to their needs. And this has been kind of a historical fact of life for us. In doing the community plan process, we decided to use North Glendale as our first community plan, as a way to do proactive outreach based on knowing for decades that they have felt underserved. And the results of this community plan outreach process were phenomenal for us. We convened many public meetings, large-scale public meetings, where we started getting initial senses from the residents what was important to them. Universally, interestingly, and this was something that surprised me, history was something that came up almost every single time. And it became so consistent that it became non-controversial. We kind of didn't need to talk about it anymore. What we ended up talking about were height limits and growth and various issues that affect the planning process in all communities. But underlying all of this was the sense like, okay, but history is critical. So as they are doing with Survey LA and the various outreach in Los Angeles, we are a multi-ethnic, multilingual city, so we do our outreach in many languages. We have our print materials and our newspaper materials go out in Armenian, in Spanish, in Korean. And then we also have live translation available at most of our events when we know that we're going to have community members who aren't native or first language English speakers. We also do our outreach through advertising in the newspaper. And having a local newspaper is a lot easier than having the Los Angeles Times or the San Francisco Chronicle. We can afford at the city level to take out ads in our local paper, and that's really important in terms of doing outreach because ultimately we're still only reaching a small percentage of the population when we do this, but it's much, much larger than we would have if we used kind of our traditional network of mailings that can go out to community leaders. We had this series of public meetings, but we also had a task force that was developed that was met over, I can't remember if it was 14 or 15 times, but we had an incredibly dedicated group of people who met over the course of 2 years. And the level of commitment and passion on the part of the community, I think, was a reflection of the fact that they were finally being recognized by the city. Our outreach was really working. And the result is that we developed a community plan along with a historic context that's part of the community plan that addressed every need that we heard of from the community, that looked to the future of North Glendale through the prism of the past. So we aren't ignoring the past in terms of our development plans, but we have had a huge amount of goodwill come to the city and to our planning department based on this kind of outreach in North Glendale. So this is an example of where when you hear people saying, you're not paying attention to us, we're kind of neglected, I think it's really important for officials and staff people at city level government to really take that seriously and to help, even if it's a squeaky wheel situation, it's going to reap benefits for years to come, and I think it's really important to pay attention to how you do this kind of outreach to make sure you're reaching as broad a constituency as possible. In terms of getting the word out, I just wanted to quickly go over a couple of ideas. In Glendale, we have a very limited budget. In fact, in the last 2 years, we've had a zero budget for doing historic preservation outreach. One of the key ways that we can get the word out is by piggybacking and having partnerships with local organizations. So we're lucky to have the Glendale Historical Society as well as the Crescenta Valley Historical Society on our side. We have a very good relationship between staff, between city officials, and between the historical societies. And unlike some cities, we actually take them seriously. There's concern when we have internal discussions about what's going on. We'll say, well, what will the people at Glendale Historical say? If anyone's out on the line right now you know it's true. But it's something, I think it's important. We can't neglect to, not take our constituents seriously. And I know that's often a temptation based on some constituents and the way we hear from them. But what we've been able to do is do educational outreach through basically a series of presentations that I present. Our historic preservation commissioners can get involved. And what we're able to do by working with the Glendale Historical Society or with our homeowners associations is basically have them take care of doing a lot of the outreach. They'll sometimes take out an ad in the paper. They'll mail out postcards to their membership. They'll do email blasts. They'll do a lot of the things that we're not able to do, and it's been very successful. The lesson that I've learned from this is whenever one of your local groups, whether it's a preservation group or a neighborhood group, asks you to do something, you should do it. If you can't do it, you should get someone else to do it. Maintaining this kind of relationship, helping them fill voids in their schedule, frankly, is sometimes why they need us to step in and help with a little slideshow of some kind, is really important, not just for getting the word out, but for maintaining relationships with our groups. Glendale Historical has gotten some new board members, and they're getting really savvy with their graphics. So now we have an event that was announced as if it were on a bronze plaque. So these are the ways to go. When we aren't involved directly with some events, we think it's really important for city staff, for Historic Preservation Commission members, for directors of planning departments and other city officials to actually participate. So we make a point of making sure that we have people going out on all of the tours and all of the events that our local groups are putting together. And here's an example of some of these events where we can move from doing something like a traditional walking tour that was co-sponsored by our Historic Preservation Commission. So again, we're doing outreach by being part of the community, spending time with them, helping lead these kinds of tours or workshops, but then also working with new constituencies that we wouldn't have expected. For example, we have a very strong bicycle movement in the Los Angeles area. It's become very strong in Glendale. And here's an example of a group of bicyclists who got together on a history ride where they went from one historic site to another. They enjoyed the ride. They were probably there primarily to be out on their bikes riding through the city. But at every stop, we had someone who was able to share the history of the site and take them forward into the past. I wanted to finish up with just a few tips about working with the press. My experience with the press ranges from TV reporting to the Los Angeles Times to large-scale papers, but really what I've been focusing on is our relationship with our small-town Glendale News Press, the local paper, and I'm sure that's something a lot of you can relate to. Here's a little cartoon of Lois Lane, who's really going to tear that city apart. The truth is going to come out. And we have reporters like this on our local newspaper. We have young reporters, seemingly in high school still, but they may have journalism degrees. They're not always the best reporters, but we have to give them the respect that they deserve as members of the media, and we have to work with them to help educate them so that they know what we're doing, so that they feel they have a friendly relationship with us, and so that we can proactively work with them to help get things covered. So again, today's this part of the presentation is focusing on proactive and reactive issues. In terms of proactive media outreach, I think whenever you have an issue, whether it's from an advocacy point of view or even from the city, if you want to get coverage, having a good relationship with a reporter or certainly with an editor is going to help you. You can pitch a story, you can just give them a call and let them know what's going on in the community. Of course, they're going to make a decision whether they're going to run with it, but having that kind of good relationship is really important. Of course, issuing press releases is something that both local governments do and local groups do, and that can get the word out. A press release tied to an event is often very effective, and maybe even more effective when that event turns into a great protest of some sort. There's a lot of great kind of agitprop theater that can go on to help get an advocacy group's message out. Obviously, at the city level, we're not doing a lot of agitprop, but I think it's important to remember that you have to differentiate your cause from other causes, your issue from what other people are concerned about, if you think it's going to be benefit to you to get press coverage. In Glendale, our historic districts in particular have garnered a lot of attention from our local paper. We have yet to make the Los Angeles Times, but pretty much every step of the way we are on the front page of the news press as we move forward. And people who are kind of community leaders and decision makers are reading the news press every day, and the press that we're getting is good so far. We haven't had any issues. It's all positive, and it's helping spread the excitement about historic districts and what we're trying to do. We also try to get our people profiled. It's really important because we're a citizen-driven, grassroots kind of historic district process that was developed in our ordinance, and we think it's important for the people who really do the hard work, the people who really work with their neighbors to get districts created, to get some attention for them. So we've often talked to people in the press about who's involved, what their story is, and we've gotten several stories put out that way. Finally, I just wanted to close off with the other side of media relations when you're kind of reacting to something rather than thinking ahead. Very often, if you're the preservation planner, the planning director, or other city officials or staff, you'll get calls from the press. Some cities have a policy, do not talk to the press. In Glendale, we are allowed to talk to the press unless we think it's an issue that we're uncomfortable talking about, or that we've been told this needs to be escalated to someone at a higher level within city government. In general, I think these are really basic rules, but it's something to always remember. Reporters will always leave you a message saying, I'm on deadline, I need to talk to you. And it's such a generic statement for them to make that you sometimes doubt that it's really true. But I think it's really important to accept that, to respect it, and to assume it's true and return those calls promptly. You don't want to miss having your opportunity to get your message out just because you missed a reporter's deadline. It's really important when you know that an issue is going to get some attention to have your talking points kind of created up front. You want to get your message out to the people, and you want to stay on that message. If anyone wants to know how to stay on message, just start ProQuesting some recent LA Times and look for Ken Bernstein. Ken Bernstein is a phenomenal interview, and really I'm endlessly impressed when I read his quotes that he really can make it work. So I've learned a lot from him and still have a lot to learn, but you all probably have people in your cities who are particularly good at this sort of thing, and you should pay attention to that. One thing that I've found is when people are asking for a phone interview, sometimes you're not quite ready. You pick up the phone, and lo and behold, it's our girl reporter from the Glendale News Press, and I'm not exactly sure how many properties we're talking about, or that I have all of my talking points in my head. So what I do is I say, I'm going to have to get back to you. I'm going to call you in 5 minutes. Put the phone down, do your research really quickly, and then get back on the phone and be sure that you get the information to the reporter when they need it. One final thing, and this doesn't come up that often, but every so often you're going to be on camera with local news. What preservationists are known for is being hysterical preservationists, as you may have heard. We want to look professional as a profession and a movement. We want to be taken seriously. We want to look good when we're doing this. So one of the keys is to make friends with the reporter. This is someone you've probably never met, and you may never meet again. Even if you've seen them on the news, you don't know what to expect from them. But creating kind of a cordial atmosphere between you and the reporter is going to be very helpful. One other tip is make friends with the camera person also. Maybe they will shoot you from a more flattering angle or not make you look like a crazy person. And I just wanted to close with this final piece of advice that you'll never forget when you see this image. Do not attack the reporters. Do not attack the media. The media are going to be our friend as long as we keep them as our friend, and it's very important to work with them in a serious, professional manner and that is where I want to leave you. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand it back to Ken Bernstein, and I think we're going to be able to take some questions from the audience. Thanks.
Thank you, Jay. Yes, at this time, if you have a question, please submit it using the box. Type in your question, and I do have a couple of questions, so I'm going to go ahead and start if you guys are ready on the other end. Ken?
We're ready.
All right. So the first question, what kind of advice can you give to a historic preservation committee who were grassroots and very successful in getting the city to create 4 historic districts plus a citywide plan? We are now orphaned. The preservation department was under the redevelopment department, and the redevelopment department disappeared in March, and now the entire preservation plan has no city staff to manage it. We have almost 300 houses with Mills Act contracts, and the HP Committee of Volunteers is expected to take over the maintenance of all things preservation. What, if anything, can you suggest in terms of how we can proceed and/or insist that the city take responsibility for the preservation plan and Mills Act contracts?
That's a really tough one. When you have Mills Act contracts, you have a relationship that doesn't matter if you have a redevelopment agency. The city is still responsible to monitor the properties, and the owners are still responsible to hold up their end of the contract. In terms of staffing, that's I think the really tough situation. And bringing redevelopment has thrown everyone into turmoil. Advocating with the city to create a staff person, whether it's a planner or someone else who's going to take responsibility, even if it's an interim position, I think would be really important to just not leave it in the lurch.
I would just add, this is Ken, I would just add, it sounds like your task is really twofold. In a way, you have an advocacy challenge. It's an outreach challenge to continue to be an advocacy grassroots organization and advocate for dedicated city staffing and an actual program to administer the program. And then you are at the same time stepping into the role of a de facto city government. And you're going to have to kind of blend the communication and outreach tools of an advocacy organization with many of the tools we've talked about today, beginning to rethink your role as if you are a local governmental entity. And to do those simultaneously certainly will be a challenge, to blend the tools that we've talked about today, conveying the message of the program you're administering and doing the outreach related to what a local government would do, while simultaneously building a constituency, continuing to build support, and advocating from the outside for city government to step up and take on additional responsibilities in the absence of redevelopment.
Yeah, and then some cities have actually abdicated responsibility for some of their historic properties in terms of inspections, reviews, and ongoing regulation to local nonprofit groups, and that would have to be a contractual relationship between the group and the city. That certainly could be an interim solution. I don't think it's an ideal solution, especially when you're talking about contracts. I think it's really important that those are administered by people who are working for the city.
Okay. The next question is, all comments are related to those that supported saving historical buildings. Any ideas on how to deal with the public that sees no worth in saving the historic buildings?
Well, I think much of what we've talked about, in fact, is related to education and outreach to also address myths or misconceptions that would lead members of the public to not support saving a historic building. So, again, some of the tools I mentioned, the top 10 myths of historic preservation, many of those deal with misconceptions people have about the effects of historic designation or of protection of historic buildings, that if you designate a historic building, its property value will decline, or the historic district results in declines in property values, or misconceptions that someone can't alter or has to kind of freeze in place a designated historic structure. So I think to me, one of the keys is developing those key message points to address at kind of the root causes, the objections that lead someone or groups of individuals not to support historic preservation, and to be very clear about that messaging, to kind of take those on directly, kind of head on, and develop materials or talking points, whatever tools you might develop to address those potential concerns.
In terms of our historic district process, we are working based on our ordinance. We need to have over 50% buy-in from owners of properties in historic districts. And during the process, with our extensive outreach in Glendale, we hear from a number of people who do not believe a historic district is the way to go. And we allow them to voice their opinion and try to garner support from their neighbors if that's what they choose. We, as a city, are neutral on whether this historic district is going to occur or not. We are ready to say it's not going to happen if we don't have the support. And by having an extensive public process that I think gives the fairest opportunity for opponents of a district as well as supporters to have their voices heard and to try to convince their neighbors in terms of what they think the right thing to do is.
Okay, there's a follow-up question to that first question. What if the city also doesn't support it and we have a small public that is trying to save it? How to change that city?
Yeah, that's education and advocacy and voting. It's putting candidates up for city council who are going to support issues that people in the community care about. If you have a substantial percentage of people who really care about preservation and they feel neglected by the city council, getting that city council to change is the best way to change it, even though that's definitely a slow process and may not happen for years to come.
You know, I would say, and some of this might be addressed. CPF is doing a follow-up webinar in a couple of weeks on effective local preservation programs, and I think one of the roles of local government and anyone running a local preservation program is to do education not only with the public, that type of education and outreach, but within city government itself, within your local government, and at times that means playing that type of role as a resource or doing education and outreach to other city departments that may have a role in the preservation process or may have misunderstandings of what historic preservation is all about. And at other times it's related to elected officials. And again, our role is not necessarily to be an advocate for historic preservation in the way that a preservation nonprofit or advocacy group would, but to be a resource for our electeds. We are viewed as the knowledgeable experts on this topic, and to, again, address the misconceptions. And you know, most elected officials come to office around a wide variety of issues, whether they're public safety or general quality of life. Very few get elected specifically as advocates for historic preservation or come in with strong technical knowledge on preservation. So in many cases, it falls on us, those of us who are involved with administering preservation programs, to be that resource for our local electeds well before there's a project or a problem, but to be that resource day to day.
I would also just follow up with that, in that those elected officials are what kind of sets the tone for that local government as well, and what the planners are working on, or any other aspects. You know, what is the goal while they're in office? And so if there is that preservation support at the city council level, there's more opportunities to develop that program at that time. Is there any other questions? Did you all have any other comments to, or last minute thoughts?
No, I don't think so. It's been a pleasure sharing this information with all of you out there.
All right, well, thank you all again for joining us today. Later today, you'll receive an email with a link to a survey. We would appreciate any feedback on this webinar and recommendations for future topics. I will also send an email with the final PowerPoint presentation. We hope that you will register for our next webinar on effective preservation programs that will be held on October the 9th. We hope that you have a good rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.